How did Socrates forecast the civil unrest?
That's an interesting question, but I recently published that the U.S. Army did a study looking at all social media, tracking what people had to say, so that they could try to predict civil unrest that, for example, appeared right after Trump was was inaugurated. This is what they're doing currently. We saw it in Melbourne, where the government down there is very dictatorial, and they've been monitoring Facebook, etc. And they went and arrested a pregnant woman because she simply posted on Facebook there's going to be a lockdown protest, and they went in and arrested her on incitement, which is quite absurd. This is assuming that it's going to be violent and before something even takes place. So Socrates looks at it from a different perspective. It's not monitoring everybody's Facebook or Twitter accounts or whatever. That is the end result. What comes before that is the economic side. I've studied this for a long time, for many decades, and what I've noticed over the years is that two factors. One, we were advising a major bank in Lebanon, and they had called me back in the 80s and said, gee, they had found a book in their basement with somebody had written down the Lebanese pound every day, quotes going back, decades. And could we, create a model? I said, sure. So they put somebody on the plane, brought it over, and we put it in, and computer came out, and I thought something was wrong. I said to him, I said, look, the computer says your country is going to fall apart in 8 days. I said, I don't know, something must be wrong with the data. And the response was, well, what currency would you recommend? Now, I thought this was really strange. I just told them their country is going to fall apart in 8 days, and you're not questioning that. 8 days later, the Lebanese war began. The same thing happened shortly after that. We had a client in Saudi Arabia who was big in shipping. And he called me and he said, Iran's going to start attacking shipping in the Gulf tomorrow. What do you think gold's going to do? And I asked him, I said, you telling me a war is going to start tomorrow? He said, yeah. What do you think gold's going to do? Then I began to realize that what happens is, if you're going to start a war, or you're going to do something along those lines, or a terrorist attack or whatever, and it's going to affect the markets or a currency, what do? You move your money first before you actually, wage war or whatever. So by 1998, I was giving our World Economic Conference in London, and someone from the London Financial Times actually was there. I didn't realize at the time. But back then, we also came up when the computer was forecasting that Russia would collapse. And I said, I give it about 90 days. And sure enough, that was the Russian collapse and long-term capital management, et cetera. And he put our forecast on the front page of the London Financial Times in the second section. So afterwards, we were able to find out that who was actually behind it. But what we saw was roughly 100 billion going into Russia and 150 billion coming out. So it took some time, but later on, it turned out that Russia was hiding some of its own money from the IMF so it could get more. So it was moving it off into the Channel Islands. So I've studied war from many different perspectives. And what I would say is this. It boils down to nobody's going to fight and start a war as long as they're fat and happy. Once you turn the economy down, then people start pointing fingers and want retribution. Domestic politicians will immediately start pointing their finger at somebody else. Oh, it wasn't me, it was this country or that country. And this is how war begins. It's very bad to start that sort of rhetoric. We see it, for example, that the Democrats did that with Russia and the election of 2016. Oh, they interfered, etc. Well, I know for an absolute fact the U.S. Was trying to interfere in the Russian elections in 2000. The bankers were blackmailing Yeltsin to step down, and that's how Putin even got in. But those issues aside, what we look at is the economics. And even civil unrest, people are moving to uprisings and things. Even you take the Black Lives Matter. Most of them will admit that more people came out this time because a lot of people are locked down or unemployed. I mean, there have been plenty of police shootings of blacks that were wrong. I mean, take Ferguson, for example. But this time is different. This time you had lockdowns. So people have lost jobs, etc., and they were free to go out and protest. They didn't have to leave their job to do so. So you're seeing an impact of this from civil unrest side, that the more the lockdowns take place, the more people are free to actually protest. We're seeing millions of people showing up in Germany and in Berlin. So it's not necessarily a racist thing. It's all across the board. If people are losing their jobs, they are then available more for protesting. And this is what we're seeing really on a global scale. It's not just in the United States. So, as I mentioned, in Australia, they arrested a pregnant woman for simply posting on Facebook that, oh, by the way, we're going to have a protest about the lockdowns, and the police went in and arrested her. So, this is what the civil unrest is about. From our model standpoint, we focus on the economy side. The more you turn the economy down, the more frustration people are going to have for a variety of reasons. All right. And so they're going to start attending more, protests for lockdowns or whatever the issue is. And they may be there for many different reasons. All right. But they're together, they're in a group. This is what civil unrest is rising, and it's going to continue to rise going into 2022. Because these people that have been orchestrating and manipulating this COVID pandemic, what we're looking at is basically their attempt to destroy the economy so they can rebuild it with this great reset the World Economic Forum is pushing. So as you do this, you can give them more basic guaranteed income or whatever, but they're not going to sit home. So this is getting crazy. I mean, France, they just passed a law that it's about 150 or 160 euros for a fine if you don't have a mask on just walking down the street. The third time you don't, that's 6 months in prison for not having a mask, but the CDC already says doesn't work. So what's going on here? I mean, this seems to be more of government realizing they're in trouble, that the social programs are failing, and everybody has deficits year after year after year. They never have any intention of paying anything back. So what we're looking at is the economic system itself is collapsing. And they're trying to cope with that by simultaneously coming up with this great reset and this idea that they're going to change the economy. And that's, very nice, but it's an academic's utopia. This is not the way things work. and you're putting an awful lot of people out of work, and they are going to get angry. So we look at the civil unrest from an economic standpoint, not a particular reason, if it's lockdowns or police brutality or excess deaths from even ventilators. So this is what's happening. It's when you lose your job, your savings, your future is quite in flux. People then band together, they start acting, and they take out those frustrations. So our model is not looking at what people are talking about on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. I mean, that's very nice. The government can try to do that, but that's the end game. What we're looking at creates that to begin with. So that's what Socrates does, and our models are focusing more on the economics and the capital flows and things of that nature. After that, that builds up the frustration, and that's what the U.S. Army and other governments have done, is going monitoring everything in social media to be able to predict when you're going to start throwing bricks at them. So our model is slightly different. It shows the origin rather than the end game. So this is what Socrates is forecasting, that there is clearly a risk of rising civil unrest. And then unfortunately, it also is warning about international war. And that comes into play with these people that are trying to create this great reset. They can't create a great reset without also subjugating Russia and China. And that's just not going to happen.